November the 9th, 2017, 10:23 p.m. EST. One common bug in regulatory regimes covering short-term rentals, AirBNB, VRBO and the like is that they don't, work. They don't work hardly at all, and certainly not at first. The internet is full to bursting with stories of cartoonishly ineffectual rules being flouted in cities all over the world. At one point last year, San Francisco estimated 3/4 of AirBNB listings in the city were illegal. The city requires landlords to have a business license and to register their units. Earlier this year, after a legal battle, AirBNB essentially agreed to become part of the city's enforcement regime, demanding proof of eligibility when units are registered. Bringing the company on board is probably the best approach. In a city like San Francisco or New York or Toronto, there's just too much money to be made for municipal enforcement to make any significant dent in a scofflaw market. That brings us to Toronto's proposed regulations, which were unveiled Wednesday. Under them, Torontonians could rent out rooms and secondary suites in their homes as much as they liked, though not for more than 28 days at a spell, but they could only rent out their entire home for 180 days per year and only if it's their primary residence. You couldn't just buy a house full of apartments and rent them out on Airbnb, for example, a common form of listing in many cities, above board or below. In theory, according to a city staff report, that might yank about 3,200 properties off the short-term rental market, or about 30%. I say in theory because Toronto is not a city that's known for rigorous bylaw enforcement. If you call about construction noise late at night, someone might drop by to check it out in 2 weeks during regular working hours. Our thriving community of marijuana dispensaries is a zoning inspector's waking nightmare, in addition to being unambiguously illegal. The buses and taxis only lane on Bay Street is a bad joke. Most analogous to Airbnb, Uber thumbed its nose outrageously at City Hall until we finally subsumed it into the regulatory framework. And I say in theory because the proposed regulations have a laughable hole in them. While you must declare to the city that your short-term rental is your principal residence, you needn't prove it unless the aforementioned fearsome bylaw enforcement apparatus demands it of you. This has all the makings of another farce that accomplishes none of the goals of the exercise. If this plan doesn't achieve compliance, Toronto could be left paying millions of dollars a year for regulation that isn't working, says Zach Mandlowitz, resident of the Home Sharing Service Providers, an industry group representing the owners of 500 short-term rental units in Toronto. Instead, we can be seen as the opportunity rather than the problem, tax us and use our money to essentially create a net economic benefit for the city. His members just want to operate respectable businesses like any others, he says, and it's a solid pitch. The problem is that for every Toronto politician who wants to help property owners and tourists, there's another who loathes the very idea of Airbnb, if not on principle or in deference to the hotel industry, then because it removes potential long-term rentals from an incredibly tight market.